So, 4 problems. What do you want to see done? This entire section is graphing quadratic functions. Now, real quick, when I was grading through quizzes and stuff, some of you guys are like, yeah, I don't graph. It's blank. So on that quiz, which is worth 16 points, that was 6 of the points that you just kissed goodbye because you didn't want to try the problem. Now, when it comes to graphing quadratics, each graph is worth 10 points. I don't like to graph. Okay, each one you don't do is 10 points. So I understand you might not be a super big fan of graphing. I get it. But it's something that we have to figure out. There are 3 graphing sections in this chapter. If you don't put in the effort to learn how to graph, you will fail the chapter. Straight up. Okay? Every chapter we do from now until forever, every chapter has at least 1 graphing section. So, again, it's one of those things where I'm not asking you to love it, kind of like fractions, but I am asking you to be able to handle it. Okay? So, whatever your fear is with it, we got to get past to where you accept it, right? Wusa, whatever, yin-yang, kung fu, ho-ho-ho-ho, right? Get past the frustration and the hatred and get to where you can at least use it, because that's going to be the expectation, okay? So, number 15, what's number 15 say, please? What's the equation? Okay, so first of all, everybody okay with this being a quadratic and not linear, right? The biggest power is 2. All right, so first thing I want to know is, does this equation point up or point down? Point down because A is negative. Okay, so the first thing that we need to find is A, B, and C. So what is the A for my equation up here, please? -1. What is my B? 0. How come? Right, there's no x term, right? So what's the only number times anything that makes it go away? 0, right? And then what's my constant? What's my C? 2. So is everybody okay with where I'm getting A, B, C from? Right, everybody all right with that being the coefficient setup where A is attached to x squared, B is attached to x, and C is just the constant with no variable? Right, everybody good? All right, what's the next thing I need to find? The vertex. I find the x-coordinate of the vertex, negative b over 2a, so all I do is plug in the values from up above, right? What's my b? What's my a? Okay, what's -1 times 0 on top here? 0, and what is 2 times -1? -2, what's 0 divided by anything? 0, so my x-coordinate is 0. All right, so for a quadratic, what kind of symmetry are we going to have? Or what kind of an axis of symmetry are we going to have? Are we going to have a vertical axis or a horizontal axis? Vertical. So that means that this is going to be x equals, and what point does the vertical line of symmetry have to pass through? The vertex. So the x-coordinate to the vertex is going to be the same as the equation to our axis of symmetry. So what is the x-coordinate to our vertex? 0. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 0. Now, you have to be careful. A lot of people write the axis of symmetry as a value, as a point. It's not a value. It's a line. It's an axis, okay? So you have to write it out as an equation of a line. So I actually do need to see x equals. Everybody all right with that, yeah? So please do not forget that. If you just put 0, you're going to lose half. Okay, I need to see it written out as an equation, x equals 0. For these types of quadratics, yes, it'll always be x equals something. And the something will be the x-coordinate to our vertex. So if the vertex was like -5, 3, then the axis of symmetry is x equals -5. All right, so how do I find the y-coordinate? What do I do? Okay, plug your x-coordinate back into what? Like, okay, into the original equation. So I'm going to take f of, what's my x-coordinate? 0. And wherever I see x, I'm going to replace it with 0. And please remember, whenever you substitute, use parentheses, especially if you're going to be using your calculator to evaluate. And this is a very calculator-heavy section. So remember, though, calculators are only as smart as the users. And by that, what I mean is it's only as effective as you know how to make it. All right, calculators can be ridiculously powerful, but it relies on you knowing how to use them. So if you don't know how to make your calculator do something, ask and I'll show you. Everybody all right with that? Yeah? Okay. I know it's kind of a stereotype for like math teachers to be big nerds, but I happen to be a nerd and a math teacher. So I'm a big fan of calculators. All right, so if you have questions as to how do I make my calculator do something, ask and I'll be able to figure it out, even if I have to look it up if it's a Casio. Okay? So when we evaluate here, we start with our parentheses, so there's nothing to do inside. So exponents, what's 0 squared? 0, what's negative 1 times 0? And then plus 2, and what's 0 plus 2? 2, so that is the y-coordinate to my vertex. Everybody good? Yeah? No? Maybe? Yes, you put your vertex in the middle, always. Yep, 2 above and 2 below, anywhere you want. But remember, you have to graph them, so you don't want to go too far away. Yeah, that's really common, is just go like 2 above and 2 below. It'll get a little bit more weird in the next section because we're going to get fractions and decimals and stuff running around. Okay, so everybody all right so far? Any questions on how I set up my t-chart? All right, so plug in 1. What's 1 squared? 1. Negative 1 times 1. Negative 1 plus 2. Positive 1. Everybody okay? So real quick, is this pointing up or down again? You said it's pointing down, right? So is the vertex a minimum or a maximum? It's a maximum. So what does that mean? If it's a maximum, it's what? Right, it is the highest point, right? So what that means is if I have the right coordinates here, right, will there be a y value bigger than the one for my vertex? No. So like in first hour, I did an entire problem wrong, and 10 minutes into it, I caught it right here. Okay, if this is a maximum and you know it's a max, and you get a y value that is bigger, then either you mistyped when you evaluate it on your chart, or this isn't really the vertex. Okay, so it was one of those things where it was supposed to be a maximum. I had -4, and then I had an answer of -2, which is bigger. And it turns out I dropped the negative sign when I calculated my x way over here. So I had to erase everything and start over. So it's one of those things to keep in mind, okay? If it's pointing down, you have a max. So that means that the y-coordinate for your vertex has to be the biggest value on the chart for the y-axis. Everybody okay with that? Yeah? All right, so it's just a little check you can run. So plug in -1, right? What's -1 squared? Positive 1, right? -1 times 1. -1 plus 2 is positive 1, right? Plug in -2. -2 squared is 4 times -1. -4 plus 2. -2. Now again, you notice our vertex, right? You said it's a max, has the biggest y on the board, and that's what we want. Everybody good? Yes? No? Maybe? All right, so when I graph, what's the first thing I'm going to graph? My what? Axis of symmetry. So what's the equation of my axis of symmetry? X equals 0. So what kind of a line is x equals 0? It's going to be dashed because it's the axis of symmetry, and x equals, right? Is that vertical, horizontal, or skew? Right, it's vertical. Now, real quick, I understand you all don't have the power of color coding. So if you're sitting here going, yeah, I get that, but how do I make it show up on my graph because everything's the same color? What you can do is go a couple of dash marks past the axis like that. So that way I can tell that there's a dash line running beyond the axis. Everybody okay with that? Yes, no, maybe? So if you're not sure if I can see where the axis of symmetry is, leave a note, right? Remember, if you're not sure, assume I'm going to mess it up. Leave a note. There's no such thing as too much information when it comes to what's on your graph, okay? Some of you left points when we did this in Chapter 2 because it was a dash line and you didn't mark it. So I didn't know that that's where you had your axis of symmetry, okay? So please be careful. But because I can color code, I am. But that's something that you can do to help me make sure that I give you all of the points that you're actually earning, all right? So where was the vertex? 0 what? 0, +2. Okay, at 1, where was I? 1, right? At 2, where was I? -2. At -1, where was I? And at -2. -2. Everybody see that it's going to actually make the U shape, right? If you're ever working on these and your dots don't make a U, then you miscalculated something somewhere, so don't connect the dots like, oh yeah, here. Okay, if it doesn't make the U shape, then we obviously graphed something wrong, so go back and fix the mistake. All right, so start at your vertex, curl down through your points, and there you go. Now, I do know that the problem also asks you to compare the equation back to the parent function. I'm not going to worry too much about that. Okay, that's kind of an abstract idea, and I want us to focus on the concrete idea of graphing. Okay, so I'll talk about it in a little bit here, but if you're like, what's going on, focus on how to graph these for right now. We'll get into the explanation side later. Okay, so again, these are worth 10 points. 7 points for this work. 1 point for the vertex, 1 point for the axis of symmetry, 5 points for the table. All right. The graph itself is worth 3 points. 1 point for the axis of symmetry, 1 point for labels, 1 point for the picture. Everybody all right? All right. So again, is this graph precise? No, it's a sketch, right? I'm just kind of putting it up there. So this isn't really precise, but what about this work? Is this work precise? Yeah, so it's a connection between the algebraic and the geometric, right? Algebraic is precise, geometric can be, but because it's a picture that we're drawing by hand, it has the human error element. Okay, everybody all right with that? Yeah? Okay. So moving on. So there's 15 done. Number 25. What's the equation for number 25, please? Okay. Started off in the same spot, A, B, C. C is -1, B is -2, A is -1. Start off by finding the vertex, which again is a point. The x-coordinate is going to be at -b over 2a. Plug in what you know. Negative of -2 all over 2 times -1. That's going to be 2 over a -2, which equals -1. All right. Everybody okay with x-coordinate? Yes, no, maybe? All right, to find the y-coordinate, back substitute your x into the equation. And then evaluate, so you get 1, that's -1, plus 2, minus 1, which becomes 0. So check it and see if there's any questions or concerns on how to find the vertex, x-coordinate or y-coordinate. All right, we're good? Any major questions or anything? Okay. So for the XY chart, what goes in the middle? -1 and 0. So now my x-coordinate in the middle is -1. So I need two numbers bigger than -1. What do you get? 0 and 1. Okay, and then I need two numbers smaller. -2 and -3. While we're here, I'm going to do my axis of symmetry. And that's going to be an equation. X equals what? -1. Okay, again, is this graph going to point up or down? Down, so does it have a min or a max? It has a max, right? So this y-coordinate, 0, should be my biggest y value, which means that if I did this right, all of my y's should be negatives, right? They should be smaller than 0. All right, so now plug in, right? What's 0 squared? 0. What's -2 times 0? So what's 0 plus 0 minus 1? -1. Everybody okay? All right, plug in 1. What's 1 squared? Times -1. Okay, so I've got a -1. What's -2 times 1? -2. So I have -1 minus 2 minus 1. So what's that? What's -1 minus 2 minus 1? -4, right? They all have negatives, so we keep the sign, add the numbers. 1 plus 2 plus 1. All right, everybody good? Yes? All right, plug in -2. What's -2 squared? 4, so I get -4 out of the first piece. What's -2 times -2? +4, right? What's -4 plus 4? 0. What's 0 minus 1? -1. Plug in -3. What's -3 squared? +9 times -1, -9. -2 times -3. +6. So what's -9 plus 6? -3 minus 1, -4. Is everybody okay with how I'm actually evaluating these? So, if you're like going, okay, I'm not going to do that mental math, then use your calculator. Type in this statement with your x filled in. So it would be negative parenthesis, -3, close parenthesis, squared, minus 2, parenthesis, -3, close parenthesis, minus 1, hit enter, and it'll give you a -4. Everybody all right? So I don't really care if you're doing these by hand or with computer aid, but you are responsible for being able to figure them out on your own. Everybody all right? Yes? Okay. So now I can graph. So anyway, there's your graph. Axis of symmetry and vertex. All right, so number 36. What does number 36 say? Hang on, G of X or Z? All right, so that's -3x squared plus 18x minus 5. And what do the directions actually ask you to do here? So, a graph has a minimum if it's pointing which way? Up, which means that A is positive, right? If A is negative, does the graph point up or down? Down, which creates what? A minimum or a maximum? A maximum. So, look at this graph. Which number determines whether it points up or down? A, B, or C? A. So what's my A? -3. So is that going to point up or down? Down. If the graph points down, does it have a minimum or a maximum? Okay, so maximum at somewhere. Now, what do we know about minimums and maximums? They always take place at the what? The vertex. So what they're really asking you to do here is determine if the graph points up or down, and then find the vertex. So this one, the graph points down, which means that it creates a maximum. And how do we find a vertex? -b over 2a. Plug in what you know. Simplify the statement. Write in your x answer. Everybody okay? Okay, now how do I find the y coordinate? All right, plug it back into the original equation. Three squared is 9 times -3 is -27. 18 times 3, 8, 16, 24 is 54. And then minus 5. So that's -32. 54 minus 32 is going to be 22. So the y coordinate is 22. And you're done. And this is all they want. Min or max, and then what are the coordinates to the vertex? So once you get that, you're finished. Everybody okay with 36? Yes or no? So once you find the x coordinate to the vertex, you just take that x and substitute it back into the equation to find the y that would match with it. And that's how we find the y coordinate to a vertex. Okay? Any questions on how to do 36? So last one here is going to be number 45. For 44, 45, 46, they give you 3 graphs to pick from, and they want you to pick the graph that fits the equation. Why this is important and why I put it on your homework is because this is what the ACT is going to ask you out of this section. They're not going to ask you to graph. They're going to say, which of the following graphs fits the equation? Okay? So you need to be able to identify key characteristics. So for number 45, what's the equation, please? +3. Okay. So can anybody tell me any characteristics about this graph without doing much math? Just based off of the equation, what can you tell me? Yes, sir. Okay, it's going to have a minimum. Which way is the graph going to point? Okay, points up. What do you notice about C? What's the value on C? 3. Okay, C determines vertical shift. So is this thing going to be slid up or slid down? Up, because C is positive. So moved up 3 units. All right. Anything else? What's the A? Bigger than 1 or between 0 and 1? Between 0 and 1. So does that make a skinny graph or a wide graph? Wide graph. If the A is bigger than 1, then that actually creates a skinny graph or a narrow graph because it's growing very quickly up the y-axis. So the bigger the A value is, the narrower the graph is going to be. Okay, an A value between 0 and 1 means that it's growing as a fraction, which means it's growing slowly. So the closer to 0 the A is, the wider the graph is going to be. Everybody okay with that? Yes or no? Okay, now, one other characteristic here. Do you see a B? Okay, no B means the vertex is on the y-axis. Okay, if there's no B, your vertex has to be on the y-axis because you're going to get a 0 on top for your vertex. Is everybody all right with that? Yeah? All right, so look at the 3 pictures, A, B, or C. Which one shows a graph pointing up with a minimum that was moved up 3 units, a vertex on the y-axis, and wider than normal? So your answer is A. All right, and again, these characteristics are what they're really going to be quizzing you on when it comes to the ACT time. They're going to give you 4 pictures in the statement, and you have to figure out which of the 4 pictures matches the statement. So these are the things you're going to be looking for.